The Monster of Hills. The small village of Eldergrove had always been known for its peace and quiet. Nestled at the foot of a range of dark, jagged hills, it was the kind of place where the most exciting event was the harvest festival or the occasional storm. But for as long as anyone could remember, there was one thing no one dared to speak of: the Monster of Hills. It was a story passed down through generations. The elders spoke in hushed tones, the younger ones laughed it off as superstition. But for those who had seen it, those who had heard the terrible growls and witnessed the shadows moving in the trees, there was no question: the monster was real. The hills had always been shrouded in mystery. At night, they loomed like dark sentinels against the sky, their jagged peaks vanishing into a swirling mist. No one ventured into the hills after sunset, and for good reason. Stories of a terrible beast that roamed the forests, a creature with eyes that glowed like fire, and claws sharp enough to tear through stone, were enough to keep even the bravest villagers far from its domain. But not everyone in Eldergrove was afraid. Lily was a curious young woman, new to Eldergrove. She had moved to the village just a few months ago, hoping for a quiet life away from the noise of the city. But she quickly grew bored of the peaceful routine. She longed for excitement, for something to break the monotony. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hills began to disappear into the growing darkness, Lily sat on the porch of the old farmhouse she rented, scrolling through her phone. A post caught her eye, a challenge that had been circulating on social media. Dare to walk the path into the hills at night. If you survive, you'll be the first in decades to make it out. But no one has ever come back. Will you face the monster of hills? Lily smirked. It was probably just some urban legend, but the thought of the monster intrigued her. She wanted to prove to herself that there was nothing to fear. Without a second thought, she grabbed a flashlight, put on her jacket, and headed toward the base of the hills, determined to show the world that there was no such thing as monsters. The forest at the base of the hills was quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves. The air grew colder as Lily stepped deeper into the woods, the last light of the setting sun casting long shadows behind her. Her phone's flashlight flickered weakly as she continued down the narrow path, the trees pressing in on either side. The farther she walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. She tried to laugh off the unease gnawing at her, but the sensation of being watched lingered. Then, a sound. A low growl, distant but unmistakable. Lily froze. It's probably just an animal, she whispered to herself, trying to calm the rising panic in her chest. It's just the wind. But as she continued, the growl grew louder, more distinct. And then it stopped. A sudden silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making every breath feel too loud. Her heart began to race. She checked her phone, no signal. The woods were unnaturally still now, but Lily pressed on. Her footsteps echoed in the silence, and she tried to ignore the creeping dread curling at the back of her mind. And then, from deep in the trees, came a shriek. High-pitched, like the sound of something suffering, something in pain. It made her blood run cold. She called out into the darkness, her voice shaky. "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Only the eerie whisper of the wind through the branches. Her flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment, the darkness seemed to stretch into infinity. Then, in the distance, a shadow moved. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The shadow was massive, larger than any animal she had ever seen. Her heart pounded as she squinted, trying to make out what it was. A figure dashed across the path in front of her, too fast for her to get a clear look. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, a growl rumbled from behind her, so close it made the ground tremble beneath her feet. She spun around, her flashlight illuminating a massive shape in the distance too large, too unnatural. A hulking silhouette, standing motionless. As her flashlight's beam hit it, the creature's glowing eyes reflected the light, a fiery red that seemed to pierce the very soul. Its jagged limbs were twisted in grotesque angles, and its mouth was lined with sharp, jagged teeth that glistened in the dark. Lily gasped, stumbling backward. The creature growled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine, and took a step toward her, its claws scraping the ground with a sickening screech. She turned and ran, her pulse pounding in her ears. The creature's footsteps echoed behind her, slow but deliberate. It was following her. Lily ran as fast as she could, her breath ragged, her legs burning. The woods seemed to close in around her, the trees twisting into dark shapes that seemed to move as she passed. Her flashlight flickered once more, then went out completely. In total darkness, she stumbled, falling to the ground. The creature's growl was now so close, she could feel the vibrations in her chest. She scrambled to her feet, adrenaline flooding her veins. And then, just as she was about to give in to fear, she burst into the clearing at the edge of the village. The creature's growl faded as she crossed the boundary of the woods, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Lily's hands shook as she stood up, her eyes darting around for any sign of the creature. She was safe at least, for now. She ran towards the village, her heart still racing. But as she reached the town square, she noticed something strange. The villagers were gathered in small groups, their eyes fixed on her. And then, she saw it, the faint, eerie glow in their eyes. Her blood ran cold. They weren't looking at her with concern. They were looking at her with knowing eyes. Eyes that burned like the creature's, glowing faintly red. "Did you see it?" one of the villagers asked, his voice eerily calm. Lily nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "It's real. The monster, it's real." The villagers around her nodded, their faces inscrutable. "It always comes back when someone dares to walk the path," another villager said softly. "It feeds on fear. And now it knows you." Lily's eyes widened as she looked around at the villagers, realizing with growing horror that they weren't as human as they seemed. The monster's glow wasn't just in the hills. It was everywhere.